Good morning, everybody. Earlier this month, the men and women of the United States Coast Guard carried out a number of incredible rescue missions, saving 9 people from a commercial fishing vessel that ran aground on St. George Island. Closer to home, a larger scale, heroic number of rescues followed Typhoon Halong in western Alaska, where some of our smaller communities were hit by this massive typhoon. Our Coast Guard, working with the National Guard, rescued 51 Alaskans in the middle of the night during a typhoon. These missions are a powerful reminder that the Coast Guard's work is not abstract. It is immediate, dangerous, and often the difference between life and death for Americans. Today's hearing, and I am very honored to have our newly confirmed Commandant of the United States Coast Guard, Admiral Kevin Lundy, is about making sure the historic investments Congress made in the United States Coast Guard translate into real operational capability where it matters most, when it matters most. Just to remind folks, and I try to remind everybody in Alaska about this, last year during the Budget Reconciliation Bill, what we now refer to as the Working Families Tax Cuts Act, the Congress of the United States, working with the Trump administration, made the biggest investment in the Coast Guard in American history, $25 billion. Now, I like to say the Coast Guard has a great culture, similar to the Marine Corps, in my view, an ethos of, hey, we can do more with less. Don't worry, it's okay. We know we have 50-year-old helicopters and cutters and icebreakers, but we can do more with less. Well, it's time, in my view, of the Coast Guard to do more with more. And that's what we're able to do in this budget reconciliation bill. The numbers which the Coast Guard needs are historic in that $25 billion. 16 new icebreakers. By the way, we have 2, one is broken, and the Russians have 54. It's time to close that icebreaker gap. Almost $4.5 billion to repair, replace shoreside facilities and aging infrastructure. 22 new Coast Guard cutters, including OPCs and FRCs. 40 new helicopters, mostly H-60s. 6 new C-130J aircraft. This is, as I mentioned, the biggest investment in Coast Guard history. And I think everybody, including members who didn't vote for the bill, thought that it was time to do that for the Coast Guard. So, well, I mean, I think had it been just that bill, you guys probably would have voted for it. It's a great bipartisan achievement, and we are very, very excited about it. The Coast Guard is being asked to do more across every theater. Counter-drug missions in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, complex law enforcement actions against sanctioned dark fleet tankers, sustained operations in the Indo-Pacific and the Middle East, search and rescue, combating illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, what we call IUU fishing. At the same time, it must manage operational risk while transitioning from platforms that, as I mentioned, are decades beyond their intended service lives. Nowhere is the need for this investment clearer and more prominent than in the Arctic. Just months ago, I was with Admiral Lundy. For the first time ever, we commissioned and started to home port an American icebreaker where the ice is, in Alaska. The U.S. Coast Guard, the Storis, designated to be home ported in Juneau, Alaska, represents a generational investment in the Coast Guard in our national security. It also marks a long overdue shift in how the United States approaches the Arctic, not as a distant afterthought, but as a core strategic domain. I'd like to show a slide here. As the only Arctic state, we focus on what's going on in the Arctic a lot. And there is a lot going on in the Arctic. Our adversaries, particularly Russia and China, are all over the place in America's Arctic. In our EEZ, in our ADIZ, you flip that slide over, this gives you the number of incursions from Russian strategic bombers and Chinese Navy assets, and very alarmingly, the green is joint Russian-Chinese operations in America's Arctic. Strategic bomber task forces, joint, and Navy task forces in our EEZ, joint, green. That's joint Russian-Chinese. The Chinese were off the coast of Alaska all summer. There was a really important Wall Street Journal article about this just a couple weeks ago. I'd like to submit it for the record without objection. It's called "China's Push to Master the Arctic Ocean Opens an Alarming Shortcut to the U.S." They weren't doing research, they were spying on us, and everybody knows it. So the Arctic is another key place where the Coast Guard, with its new significant investment dollars, is going to be making much more important investments to protect the northern domain of America. I'd like to again commend Admiral Lundy for his great work on this issue as well. But it's just one area that the Coast Guard's global demands have to be met. So what we want to do in this hearing is not just focus on the Arctic. I'll do that significantly, but I'm sure my colleagues want to have a better sense of the Coast Guard's force posture, laydown, global deployments, workforce decisions, and importantly, how the Coast Guard sees its ability to rapidly deploy the investments that the Congress and the Trump administration made this past summer. Again, the most significant investments in Coast Guard history. It's about time. We are very fortunate to have with us Admiral Kevin Lundy, the Commandant of the Coast Guard, who was confirmed at the end of last year at a pivotal moment for the service. Admiral, we appreciate your leadership, your willingness to discuss candidly how the Coast Guard is managing operational risks, global deployments, acquisition execution, as these historic investments begin to come online. So I would now like to offer the statements from my ranking member, Senator Blunt Rochester, at this important hearing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. To you, Admiral Lundy, welcome back to your team as well, and thank you for being here for today's hearing. I want to first congratulate you in person and just say also thank you so much for your responsiveness as this year has gone by. Whenever I text you, whenever I called, you responded so promptly, and I want to thank you and your team for your responsiveness. I also want to say how just proud we are of the Coast Guard in this country. And as you know, I got the opportunity to be with some of the Coasties in Delaware and spend some very good quality time. And so I think on behalf of all of us, I know established in 1790, I think it was, you have stood the test of time. And we're pleased to see that today we can talk about the future. Your leadership is especially important as we enter into a new era of modernizing the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard recently received the historic $25 billion investment. And so while you're poised to revolutionize your ability to counter emerging global threats and protect mariners, fishermen, and marine environments, this is a moment that is going to really present clear opportunities for you to show your leadership. And so today we will talk about that blueprint, Force Design 2028, and the investments that were made. We will also talk about how do we guarantee success. The question before us is whether the Coast Guard can convert all of that funding into something that is sustainable, long-term improvements that will correctly anticipate the growing maritime threats from global actors, as our chairman has shared, and from competitors as well, and keep us safe at the same time. I think it's also important to know that the reason this hearing is so vital is that Congress and the American people need to know, how do we go from the blueprint to the plan to execution? And in your testimony that I received last night, you're already making a lot of steps very quickly in that regard. But what you do every day is connected to our safety, our economy, and our national security. Again, reading through your testimony last night, I am really eager to especially focus on your plans to recruit and train and retain a workforce as you leverage this increase in assets, as well as the rapid increase in assets. And again, this isn't just about investing in vessels. It is also about investing in the people. And I was pleased to see in your testimony, that's where you started with workforce. It also means ensuring that Coast Guard families have access to affordable housing, good health care, and quality child care, because it's our responsibility to take care of the Coast Guard at home so that you can serve our country with confidence at sea. A large part of investing is investing in training. And that's why I want to recognize the critical role of the Coast Guard's training institutions, whether it's Woods Hole, Rhode Island, or Coast Guard Boot Camp in Illinois, or the training center, Cape May, which is just across the bay from Delaware. These institutions remain foundational to Coast Guard personnel development. So, Admiral, again, thank you so much for the responsiveness, for your service and the service of all of the Coasties and their families. And I look forward to your testimony and discussing how your leadership will guide the Coast Guard through this critical period. And Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. And Admiral, I want to introduce you again, recently confirmed as the 28th Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard after serving as the 34th Vice Commandant, previously also commanded the Coast Guard Atlantic area and led at the district level in the Indo-Pacific. So thank you for being here. You are now recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Blunt Rochester, distinguished members of this subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today and represent our Coast Guard men and women. Chairman, I ask that my written testimony be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, and thank you for the subcommittee's strong support for our Coast Guard, especially our people. For over 235 years, America has depended on the Coast Guard to ensure our national security and economic prosperity. In the face of unprecedented challenges, including adversary threats to our sovereignty, prosperity, and way of life, the nation needs a strong, capable, and more ready Coast Guard now more than ever before. With the leadership and support from President Trump and Secretary Noem and this Congress, the Coast Guard is better positioned than it was 1 year ago to achieve operational control of the border and maritime approaches, facilitate the flow of commerce, and rapidly respond to crisis. Through Force Design 2028 and the historic $25 billion investment through budget reconciliation, we are renewing the Coast Guard to become a more agile, capable, and responsive fighting force. Your continued strong support, including for sustained higher annual top-line growth in our appropriation, is vital to our continued success. 2025 was a historic year for the Coast Guard in delivering mission results with record-setting outcomes. 2 examples. We interdicted over 510,000 pounds of cocaine at sea that was headed for the United States. That's over 193 million potentially lethal doses that would have otherwise reached American communities. And we saved an additional 5,000 plus lives through search and rescue operations, including over 290 following devastating storms in Texas, in Alaska, and the Pacific Northwest. All of this while implementing Force Design 2028 as the most sweeping service transformation in more than a century. Our operations continue. In the past 2 months, in the Caribbean and North Atlantic, Coast Guard tactical teams and cutters conducted high-profile boardings of dark vessel tankers, enforcing U.S. and customary international law, along with others, to stop illegal activity, including sanctions violations and funding of narco-terrorism. In the polar regions, the nation's only heavy icebreaker, Coast Guard cutter Polar Star, commissioned 50 years ago this week, is right now conducting icebreaking operations vital to the resupply of America's McMurdo Station in Antarctica. But Polar Star is only one of 3 operational U.S. polar icebreakers. So we're rapidly expanding our icebreaking fleet to secure our northern border and maritime approaches in the Arctic. Under the President's leadership and direction, we're moving to expand our icebreaking capacity with the construction of 11 Arctic security cutters. We recently awarded 2 contracts to rapidly build and deliver 6 Arctic security cutters, 2 to a shipyard in Finland, 4 to a shipyard in the United States, and we're working on awarding additional contract for 5 more that will onshore more shipbuilding into U.S. shipyards and strengthen America's industrial base. But assets do not make the Coast Guard. Our people do. We must grow our workforce and support the readiness of our men and women and their families. We must increase annual operating funds to provide our people and the families the housing, childcare, medical care, training, and the support services they need to be able to serve and serve successfully. Last year, the budget reconciliation funded recapitalization of aging assets and new technology needed for the Coast Guard to rebuild readiness. We've already obligated $7.8 billion and will obligate over $20 billion, 75% of the full amount, by the end of this year to deliver new cutters, boats, aircraft, shore infrastructure, and technology. But this is a down payment. We need significant, sustained, higher annual top-line growth, especially in our operating funds, starting with the 26 appropriation. Any lapse in appropriation disrupts our ability to conduct operations, rebuild readiness, and deliver value to the American people. Any shutdown means that many of our people will go without pay, even while they have to continue working, which is an unwarranted financial hardship. I urge the Congress in strongest terms to pass a budget now that funds the Coast Guard and pays our people. I also ask for the Senate's support to put the full Coast Guard senior leadership team in place by confirming the President's nominees for our Vice Commandant, our 4 Vice Admiral positions, and our other presidential nominees. The new leadership team is critical to our success now. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. And I'm going to defer my first round of questionings to the distinguished Chairman of the Armed Services Committee. And I will tell you that Chairman Wicker cares deeply about the Coast Guard. And we had an important victory in December where we attached the Coast Guard Authorization Act that we worked on hard here in this committee to the National Defense Authorization Act, which is something I've been advocating for years. It makes sense to bring all of our military services together in their reauthorization acts in one bill and one vote, and that's what we achieved at the end of last year, and we did it in large part because of the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. So I'm going to defer my first round of questioning to Chairman Wicker.
Mr. Chairman, I really do appreciate that, and of course, much of the credit for the inclusion of that provision in the Armed Services Authorization Bill goes to you as a senator from Alaska and as subcommittee chairman here, so thank you for that. There's a lot I need to mention, and I only have a moment or two. Let me mention Junior ROTC. You and I spoke about this. Admiral Lundy, thank you for whatever role you may have played in directing that 2 new units be established in April of this year, one in Oregon and one in Alaska. I think Junior ROTC is a great citizenship builder, and it helps our readiness, and I just wish we could have twice as many because it's been proven. Secondly, Senator Schatz and I have legislation that would require an annual plan and budget display for Coast Guard operations in the Pacific. So if you would speak to the relationship that the Coast Guard and DOD have and tell us what you need extra of this top line that you mentioned to increase our op tempo in the Indo-Pacific.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your question on the Indo-Pacific. You know, the Coast Guard Well, first of all, the United States is not only a Pacific nation, we're also a Pacific Island nation because of Hawaii and our 3 territories there. And so the Coast Guard's been present in Hawaii, in the Pacific for a very long time. And we work very closely with the Department of War there. And our presence has increased in the Pacific. Since I served out there as the commander of the Oceania District, we've added 9 additional cutters. Congress has funded in the FY24 appropriation the addition of 2 more fast response cutters to go to Guam. We shifted a medium endurance cutter permanently to the Pacific to increase our operations there. And the 26 appropriation that is pending now would add another $116 million in operating funds to improve training, engagement teams throughout the Pacific Island nations, and to strengthen U.S. national security and defense in the Indo-Pacific. And so it's a vital area of operations, and we continue to expand our commitment and our footprint into the Indo-Pacific because that's not just somewhere over there. The Indo-Pacific for us is also the U.S. homeland because of Hawaii and our 3 territories.
Do I take it from your testimony, and the answer to the question is, we've made a good start, we've got a lot more to do?
Yes, sir, we do. We've made a good start, but we have much more to do to strengthen our presence in the Indo-Pacific.
And are you also suggesting that our plus-ups really should be part of the regular appropriations process, ideally, rather than going through the reconciliation process, or do you have a position on that, sir?
Well, yes, sir. Certainly the reconciliation process infuses an investment that's needed, but it really must be supported by sustained investment in the capitalization money and also our operating funds, because these assets are badly needed, but it's the crews that operate them that make the Coast Guard able to do what it does.
And the annual top line does matter, doesn't it?
It does, yes, sir.
Now, okay, tell us about about where we are on helicopters. We put some money in for the Jayhawks. Apparently, we're phasing out the Dolphins. Actually, the MH-60 Jayhawks. Are we moving then to a combination of that, just simply called the Jayhawk and not the MH-60? Where are we on that? You've got to clear us up.
Yes, sir. Senator, the MH-60, we call our variant the Jayhawk, and so we are moving toward primarily, and have been on a road to move to a 60 rotary wing fleet. We are continuing to look at other options, and then reconciliation investment is given that, because the older 65 short-range helicopter is approaching obsolescence.
The Dolphin.
The Dolphin. Much harder to maintain. The original equipment manufacturer doesn't supply parts. So we're phasing those out, and we're growing
Over
the
what
60s.
time, sir?
Well, the original was to phase them out by 2037, but we think the sunset's going to come much faster given the obsolescence.
Because of the reality there. Well, keep us posted on there. And again, I think we got Mr. Chairman, if you'll just indulge me, we got $2 billion in last year's reconciliation for the Jayhawks. So keep telling us what you need. What are your plans for Coast Guard Station Pascagoula? I know it's not in Alaska, but there are Coast Guard facilities elsewhere in the country.
I didn't know that. That's really good to know.
Will we be returning to full response operations according to your plans at Coast Guard Station Pascagoula?
Yes, sir, we will. I made a decision in December to restore that to a full mission of response station. We had downgraded it in 2023 when I commanded Atlantic area. I was part of that because of our severe personnel shortages. And now we're in a position where we need to restore it to full response operations, and we're going to do that in 2026.
Was that a mistake or just something you had to do?
Something we had to do, Senator, because we were so short of personnel. But based on recruiting successes over the last several years, we're now in a position to restore it to full operations.
How important, and this is my last question, Mr. Chairman, and you all have been very indulgent, how important are autonomous systems going to be going forward?
Well, they're critical, Senator. And we've made investments in those systems, especially fueled by the budget reconciliation investment. In fact, we've already, in that $7.8 billion that we've already obligated, we've purchased a number of short-range and medium-range autonomous systems, both air and surface, and even subsurface. They're providing us an ability and a capability we didn't have before to perform our missions. And there's also funding for long-range UAS that we haven't yet obligated, but we're on track to.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, Admiral, I might have shared with you that in a former life, I was head of state personnel for the state of Delaware. And so, again, the focus on jobs, I was Secretary of Labor as well, and the focus of making sure that the workforce is well-equipped, well-trained, and that you can recruit has always been sort of a top mind for me, because you can't do your mission if you don't have the people, and you can't do the mission well if the people aren't, if you have a good culture and people feel that they're in a good place. And I know with Force Design 2028, it called for the expansion of the Coast Guard by 15,000 active duty personnel, which is over 1/3 increase of the number of active service members. Am I correct on that?
That's correct, Ranking Member Blunt Rochester.
Yes. And I know that there was a GAO report last year that indicated that you were about 2,600 personnel short. Do you recall that report?
I do, yes.
What, was it accurate?
It was close, but we're moving in the right direction, so the numbers are changing in a positive way since that report.
Which is a huge direction, because I saw in your testimony you indicated you hired 6,000 folks. Did I read that correctly?
Last year, we finished with over 5,200, so near 6,000, and we're on track to reach 6,000 already this year.
Okay, so would you say you're at full strength for what you're trying to do now?
Well, we're almost back to restoring that deficit, that 10% shortage in our enlisted workforce. I think by the end of the summer or early fall, we'll have been out of that and well-positioned to keep growing the force toward that 15,000 number.
Can you talk a little bit about what you did to be so successful in that recruitment? Were there specific things that you did differently? Were there things that you said, we're not going to do that anymore? Can you talk a little bit about how you have been able to so far make this kind of progress in a year?
Thank you for the question, because it really highlights the importance of our recruiting effort. And I think we're going to need the level of effort that we've put into recruiting going forward. We're never going to go back to a situation where we can just expect people know and want to join the Coast Guard. We've got to tell our story better. And so we invested in the people and the talent and the expertise and technology to be able to recruit, reach all parts of the United States, attract the best young men and women who have a propensity to serve and want to serve their country, and then recruit them into the country. And that's involved opening more recruiting offices, including in places we didn't have them or haven't had them for a long time, like the Midwest. And then using technology to be able to reach young people where they operate, where they live, where they consume information, rather than the traditional methods that I was used to recruit me a long time ago.
And you know, when I saw the number 15,000, that's significant. And I was thinking, how do you think you'll be able to sustain that pace of, you hired nearly 6,000. Do you think you will be able to sustain that pace? And what do you think it will take to do that?
Well, it's really important, Ranking Member, because it's not only on the recruiting side. We need to have that training capacity in our system. First at Training Center Cape May, where there's a significant investment to improve and expand our capability there, but also in our follow-on training for our force. And so that's one of the key parts, is expanding that training capacity and the ability to develop our people. That becomes critical. But it's driven by an increase in our operating funding. Just to give one quick example, the 11 Arctic security cutters that we're building at the President's direction, that will require 1,300 new Coast Guard people that don't exist today to be able to operate those.
Wow. Wow. And so therefore, again, the investment in training is so important, because that doesn't exist today. Can you also talk about, you know, I know there are plans to build over a dozen new vessels with this funding that you received. How long does it take to build a ship like a polar ice cutter?
Well, Ranking Member, what we've done is taken a new approach that is enabling us to move at speed and scale in a way we haven't before. First, the budget reconciliation gave relief from Chapter 11 and Title 14 for the pre-acquisition activities. Originally thought it was a way to reduce risk, it actually slowed us down by bogging us down with a lot of work that had to happen before we could move ahead with an acquisition. We've also gotten rid of these long hundreds of pages of boutique requirements, and we've leaned more on the commercial industry with more basic requirements so they can move faster with the funding in hand. And so we are going to be delivering these assets much faster than we have in the past.
I guess one question, and I know I am now over my time, and I don't know if we're going to have a second round. Okay, well then I will yield here and come back for a second round. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Admiral, let me, I just want you to reemphasize kind of what's at stake in the next couple days. If there's a government shutdown, another one, which we don't need, it would be unnecessary. By the way, you know, I know some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are talking about doing it because they don't want to fund ICE. ICE is going to be funded no matter what. They were funded in the budget reconciliation bill. So shutting down the government is not going to starve them of funds, but it will starve our Coast Guard of funds and the men and women of the Coast Guard and FEMA and others. Can you again just really emphasize that? I think in previous government shutdowns, the Coast Guard has really, in some ways, borne the brunt of some of these shutdowns. It's not right, and I really would like you to kind of emphasize that a little bit more, just on what would happen. It would just be completely unnecessary. We don't need to do this again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is critically important. The first thing is our people, when there's a lapse, they worry about whether they're going to get paid and when they're going to get paid.
Sure.
And it brings financial hardship. It brings worry and concern for them and for their family members. And when they're trying to be focused on being ready and serving their country, both our military and our civilian personnel, then that's a key factor to our ability to get the mission done safely. Yeah. It also, they're not sure they want to keep serving sometimes if they're not sure they're going to get paid on time. And then beyond that, it interrupts our ability to do the growth that we need to do in Force Design 2028 and transform the service. So that keeping an appropriation in place, not having a lapse, is critically important.
Well, I hope all my colleagues hear that, understand that. It's just, I don't know, it wouldn't be constructive in any way, but particularly the Coast Guard being hurt and the members and the families and the stress, as you mentioned. So let's not go there. I do want to talk about the Arctic. You and I talked about an op-ed that was written by Alice Rogoff, who I know well, just in the Washington Post a couple days ago on the importance of the Arctic. This was similar to one that I wrote in the Wall Street Journal about a year ago called Greenland is Nice, but Alaska is Better. I'd like to submit that for the record. Everything everybody's talking about on Greenland, which is strategic, Alaska has way more, and we already own Alaska. It's a great state. It's my state. So anyways, but let's talk about the Arctic. And the icebreaker numbers are great. We have this icebreaker gap with Russia, heck, with China. They're not even an Arctic nation, and I think they have more icebreakers than we do. So we're going to close that gap, which everybody wants to do. That's a very bipartisan issue here. It's been something I've been focused on my entire career here. We're starting on a really good front with the Storis being home ported and commissioned recently, but home ported in Juneau. It was a great event that you and I had the opportunity to attend back in Alaska in Juneau in August at the commissioning. The budget reconciliation bill has $300 million for the shoreside infrastructure to home port the Storis in Juneau. How do you think that's going? And are we on time, on schedule? As you know, in the previous Coast Guard Reauthorization Act, we were able to get the land transferred from NOAA to the Coast Guard to help that. But you think that's going well? And how can we keep pedal to the metal on all these issues? Part of the hearing is that we want to accelerate the great opportunities that exist in the Coast Guard across the country, across the world, and certainly in my state.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. On Storis, thank you for the support in the budget reconciliation for the $300 million to support the pier and the waterfront facilities to permanently home port Storis there. And so we're moving quickly to be able to execute that funding and have that pier and infrastructure there ready by 2029. Okay. What we still need to do, as we've talked, is to get the funding for the housing. As you know, the housing in Juneau is not adequate, and so we need funding to be able to to be able to have the adequate housing that will support the crew and the families that.
And if you put that through your requests, I'm very confident that this committee and the Congress will be strongly supportive of that. Let me go to the next issue. You and I have spoken a lot about, as you mentioned, the next phase of all these Coast Guard cutters, the heavies, the mediums, the smaller ones. I'm sure Senator Baldwin's going to ask about the ones for the Great Lakes. But I know we're looking at some, especially for the mediums, a decision around, or not decision, home porting around 2028. You and I have talked about, I've said publicly, I can't imagine that you wouldn't have significant more Coast Guard cutters where the ice is, where the action is, as I just said. In Alaska, I know you're not there yet. I know your team's looking at the home porting decision-making. But can you give me a sense of that, the direction you've given your team? I certainly would anticipate, as the chairman of this committee, a couple more icebreakers being home ported in the Arctic, where the ice is, and that means Alaska.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we've talked about this before, sir. The speed at which we're moving to build the Arctic security cutters means we're going to have to assign the people very soon, and we're going to have to make decisions in consultation with the department and then in communication with Congress on what those home porting decisions will be. And that'll happen in 2026.
Okay.
Part of the planning guidance I've given to my team as they present options to me, and I discuss them with the Secretary, is to start with an option that includes home porting Arctic security cutters in the state of Alaska.
Great. I appreciate that very much. And hopefully we can, when we're talking 2026, I'll keep pressing you guys. I think first quarter, second quarter at the latest, we want to get moving on that. But I appreciate your leadership on that. And with that, Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the last several years, the Coast Guard has received significant increased funding, as was being discussed, nearly $25 billion from the reconciliation bill passed last year. This committee, however, has received shockingly little information about how, when, and where the Coast Guard plans on spending those funds. Admiral Lundy, it is my expectation that the Coast Guard will promptly provide information to this committee on all the programs allocated funding in last year's reconciliation bill. And I want to particularly focus on the light and medium ice-breaking cutters, which received about $800 million in that $25 billion package. These new cutters are meant to replace the aging Bay class and smaller ice-breaking tugs. So, Admiral Lundy, can you provide additional information on the Coast Guard's plan to acquire new light and medium icebreakers, including how that $800 million will be split between those programs?
Senator, thank you, because our domestic icebreaking capability in our ports, waterways, and in the Great Lakes is critically important. And the funding and reconciliation to replace those medium and light icebreaking capabilities is critically important. We did a solicitation, asked for information from industry, because we're taking a commercial approach so we can, again, move at speed and scale to deliver these much faster than we otherwise would. And we've gotten that input back on both the light and the medium variants, and we're analyzing that information right now as we develop an acquisition plan to move forward with acquiring the light and the medium icebreaking capability. So we don't have a specific breakdown of which of the numbers of each variant yet, but we're working toward that. As to the plan you asked about, I've directed my staff this morning, and I will be prepared to brief and update members of the committee and also staffs on the current status of our overall reconciliation execution. And so we look forward to providing that briefing to you and to the staff as well.
Thank you. I was very disappointed when the President announced that many of the Coast Guard's new icebreakers would be primarily constructed overseas. The United States has a long and very proud tradition of constructing effective icebreakers, including in my state of Wisconsin. So I believe that money would be better spent at home. So Admiral Lundy, does the Coast Guard intend to build the light and medium icebreakers domestically?
Senator, yes, our plan is to build those in domestic U.S. shipyards with American workers.
That's music to my ears. As you might be aware, Admiral Lunde, last fall, the Navy cut the contract for the Constellation-class frigates that were being constructed in Wisconsin. Following the cuts to that contract, the Navy suggested the possibility of helping the Coast Guard out with speeding up the procurement of a second Great Lakes heavy icebreaker, which I also hope will be built in Wisconsin. So, Admiral, have you had any discussions with the Navy regarding that possibility, the possible options to speed up procurement of a second heavy icebreaker for the Great Lakes?
Senator, thank you for the question. First, acquiring a second Great Lakes icebreaker that is at least as capable as the Mackinac remains one of my top priorities for the Coast Guard. We talk with the Navy regularly on their acquisitions and ours because we are always coordinating about how we use and leverage the U.S. Defense Industrial Base. I haven't spoken with CNO Caudle directly on Fincantieri and the Great Lakes icebreaker specifically, but Fincantieri and other yards in the Great Lakes region are a critical part of the U.S. Defense Industrial Base. And so we look to award contracts to U.S. shipbuilders. We hope that those yards, shipyards that build great American ships, including those in the Great Lakes, will be competing for Coast Guard work.
Thank you. And you testified before this committee last fall and agreed that it was important to construct a second heavy icebreaker for the Great Lakes. Unfortunately, my Republican colleagues did not include any funding for the icebreaker in the reconciliation package that we've just discussed, a very hearty $25 billion, including a very significant focus on icebreakers. So do you commit to continuing to seek funding to construct the second heavy icebreaker in future budget requests?
Yes, Senator, we do. I thank the committee for the support in the 24 budget for initial $20 million. In our 26 unfunded priorities list, there's a request for an additional $35 million to complete the analyze and select phase. I would say that the relief we got in Chapter 11, Title 14 requirements in reconciliation, if we had the Congress's support to extend that relief to other major acquisitions, like the Great Lakes icebreaker, it would enable us to move much faster to be able to procure and build that icebreaker. Are you ready?
Thank you for that information.
Okay, Senator Sheehy.
Morning, Admiral. How are you? I don't know if we already covered icebreakers. Sorry, I just came in, but have we already talked about icebreakers? I
We
presume
started,
Dan has.
we're continuing, and we're not done yet.
All right. Well, if you already
So
thoroughly
join the party.
no, if we've already beat that one to death, then I don't need to hit it more. So, I am curious about back when I was in service, we had a pilot program with the Coast Guard that utilized the SEAL training pipeline, where we had some Coast Guard officers go through SEAL training with the intent of enhancing your ability to do VBSS and interdiction operations. That program was subsequently shut down. And of course, in light of recent events, I think we're seeing that the spirit of that program is very much still in demand. What is the current outlook of the Coast Guard as far as enhancing that? Because visit board search and seizure underway, capture of vessels is probably the most high-risk mission our armed forces do. We've lost many SEALs over the years. FBI agents, actually, a couple that went through SEAL training with me were killed a few years ago doing training of that. So I'm curious what the Coast Guard's current plan is to invest in that capability and enhance it. Because, like I said, I was there present when a decision was made to invest in it, and then that decision was made to divest of that.
Senator, thank you for the question. You know, the Coast Guard has been investing and spending time building out our advanced interdiction capability in our maritime security response teams, including generating a second team and capability on the West Coast. The high-profile tanker, dark fleet tanker boardings that you've seen us perform, that the Coast Guard has been led by those maritime security response teams, the direct action sections, some of our highest and most proficient operators. They work regularly with Naval Special Warfare and other members of the SOCOM community. And I've spoken with Admiral Bradley, the SOCOM commander, and also General Braga, Joint Special Operations Command commander, about how we can continue to deepen that cooperation and interoperability going forward. I am familiar with the original program where Coast Guard officers went through BUDS, the Naval Special Warfare Training. And in fact, some of those officers continue to serve with distinction in the Navy, and we remain close to them, and we consider them still part of our family. So we haven't renewed that program, but I will take a look at that program and whether or not that's something we should look at, and I'll talk with Admiral Bradley about it as well.
Yeah, and I bring it up only because the very history of special ops in the American military, although it's all in vogue now with global war on terror, the history of SOF is actually one of investment and then very quick divestment when it's not convenient to keep the snake eaters around, and they have long hair and they get in trouble a lot and they usually drink too much. So the services quickly disband them oftentimes after the conflict's over, and then are forced to recreate that capability again later when it's needed. And almost every branch has made that mistake. And luckily, after the Eagle Claw mission in Iran, jointly as a military, we recognized, let's institutionalize our special operations capability. Let's build it into our doctrine, and let's ensure it's resourced appropriately, because when we try to flex that need after it's already required, disaster strikes. And in particular, the mission that your forces are specifically tasked to do is such a high-risk mission, both from a combat perspective, also just from an operational safety perspective. Even if you're training, it's a high-risk mission, because underways, especially if you're North Atlantic or elsewhere and you have rotor wing assets involved, it's just a super, super dangerous environment. So the only branch of our military, and I understand the Coast Guard straddles, but the only branch of the military that hasn't really institutionalized special ops as a command capability. Understand you've always had the interdiction teams and that, but is the Coast Guard. So I would recommend, in light of the recent months of op tempo in this atmosphere, to say, listen, maybe the Coast Guard can lean into this again and institutionalize what is a capability which you just outlined. We have the capability, but let's make sure it's institutionalized and it's part of our doctrine, so that when you retire and someone else comes in, they don't decide, hey, we don't need this anymore. Let's shut it down, because we've done that so many times in the military, and we don't need to beat a dead horse. But thank you for taking a look at that. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator. In fact, part of force design is to establish a Special Missions Command with a dedicated flag officer focused fully on all of our deployable specialized forces, to your point. But thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Sheehy. And we have a good naval special warfare training facility in Kodiak, where we also have the largest Coast Guard station in the country. So great joint ops there. Admiral, I want to go back to just that decision, the discussion on icebreakers. I think the world of the Coast Guard. One of the criticisms I've had over the years, though, is it can sometimes be slow on the decision-making front, a little bureaucratic. So I'm hopeful that kind of timeline, as I just mentioned, on the Coast Guard decision-making on home porting icebreakers can be made, sometime first quarter, second quarter, at the very least. Up to how many icebreakers would you potentially see in terms of, given what we have in the budget reconciliation bill, up to how many would you see potentially being home ported in Alaska? You've given your team guidance on.
Mr. Chairman, as I've told the team in December, when I asked them to develop options, as they develop options, one of the first ones that I want them to present among a range of options for consideration decision, me in consultation with Secretary Nome, is for home porting of up to 4 icebreakers in Alaska. So although we are still pending a decision, that's clear guidance I've given to the team.
Great. Let me turn to your team. I was back home over the recess. I had a great force laydown briefing from your leadership team in Alaska, Captain Culpepper, a bunch of others. He actually went to Seward with me as well, so I really appreciated your team's time and effort they took with me just last week, actually. We had, it's long history, but when I first got here, the Coast Guard had this plan for a force laydown. They were looking all over the country, and they were going to take the cutters in Alaska and reduce them despite all this Arctic challenges, which I thought was a big mistake. So I kind of worked very closely with the Commandant and, you know, during his confirmation process, got them to change that look from 7, they wanted to go 7 cutters to 6. We actually went 7 to 8. And so I got an update on that, both in terms of the forced laydown, what's happening in Seward with the FRC that's coming, and the Coast Guard infrastructure dollars, both for housing, $16 million, and the shoreside infrastructure, $50 million. In Sitka, with another FRC coming there with an additional, I think it's $66 million for the shoreside infrastructure. And the need for housing money, I think they have $6 million there. The Kodiak plus up of MH60s from 5 to 9, and 2 additional OPCs that are projected there. And I have a 2-part question. One is, how do you think those investments are going? The money's already appropriated. It's part of the plan. There are very strong community interests there. They love the Coast Guard. And second, we've had this surge. It's really exciting. It's kind of chicken and the egg of shipbuilding capacity in Seward, in Ketchikan, even maybe in Wrangell. A lot of companies are starting to do the shipbuilding and heavy maintenance work. JAG is one that's an example. As you are looking at home porting, but also cost savings, does it help to have someone very close that can do the heavy maintenance overhauls, not just for Coast Guard vessels, but some of these shipbuilding companies in Alaska are doing it for Navy vessels? It seems like a really good kind of symbiotic relationship. You guys don't have to send your vessels, whether it's icebreakers or, you know, FRCs, down to Alameda and other places. You keep the families home ported where their ship's doing the overhaul. It's exciting because it's driving the private sector as well, but I think it's a cost efficiency for the Coast Guard as you look at home porting these additional assets. Can you speak on the timelines on Sitka and Seward, but also this idea of a stronger relationship with a real budding shipbuilding industry has taken off in Alaska that's quite exciting?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think on our plans for building out the infrastructure, including housing in place in Seward and Sitka and other locations, much of that is funded. We're moving forward on executing. And then the areas where we still need more funding, additional housing in some of those locations, continued housing build out in Kodiak continues to be important. On the ship.
By the way, the recent housing in Kodiak that you guys have built is just exquisite. Whoever did that in line with the Coast Guard, that is exactly what our men and women of the Coast Guard deserve. The housing facility there, I'm sure you've seen it in Kodiak, is really, really impressive. So I appreciate that very much.
Thank you, Chairman. When we were there in August, we were able to cut the ribbon on the latest development.
Beautiful.
To your question about the ship repair. So the American maritime dominance and a strong industrial base is not just about shipbuilding, it's about the repair that you mentioned. And so the more capacity in our repair and the closer it is to where cutters are home ported, the more competition and the better cost we're going to be able to get for repairing our ships. And so I'm supportive of anything that increases the availability of repair capacity and capacity that's closer to where our cutters are home ported.
Good, and isn't that also good for the crews? Because then they don't have to, they can, you know, they're not leaving their duty station as that ship is being repaired, say, more locally.
It is, Mr. Chairman.
Great. I see the chairman of the committee is coming, and I don't know if you want to, are you ready to go, Mr. Chairman, or should we turn it over to Senator Blunt Rochester?
Go ahead.
Okay, Senator Blunt Rochester.
Get your bearings here. Well, thank you. I'm not sure if this is round 2 or 3, but it feels like a moving fleet. I want to continue my questions, but I also want to start off by acknowledging what the chairman said, that we hope there isn't a shutdown. And I think there have been positive signs even in the past 24 hours with the engagement of the White House, as well as a bipartisan group of senators, which I think is important for the country to see. And so let's start there. Secondly, I would be remiss if I let the opportunity to go by without acknowledging Sector Delaware Bay, as well as our folks at station in Indian River in Delaware. Again, just doing exemplary work and represented very well, represented the organization as well as the country. To follow up on my questions, I know we were talking about the amount of folks you have to hire, the ability that you were able to recruit so many. Did I understand there's still a deficit, though, at this point, of what you'd like to see in terms of a complete force?
There is, Ranking Member. The clear direction Force Design is not only to restore our, come out of the deficit in our enlisted workforce, but to grow our military workforce by 15,000. And we're going to need that workforce to operate the assets, the growth in assets that Congress has funded. American people have funded the Coast Guard to do more operations and deliver more value to the American people.
Right. And I know we talked about the buildup and how long all of that takes as well. When the tankers were seized off the coast of Venezuela, did you have to move your folks from whether it was, search and rescue or other core functions, or was it what you expected?
Ranking Member, not from search and rescue mission. So the teams, the specialized elite teams, perform this type of mission in other areas, or they're on ready status to be able to perform. And so this is within their normal mission profile, just more visible than it's been in the past. But we've used Marine inspectors and our cyber protection teams as well. And then we've used cutters that would maybe otherwise be doing our maritime drug law enforcement mission. We've reallocated them to this mission temporarily while we do some of the tanker operations.
Right. I also will follow up with you as the member who I've worked on supply chains a lot, both here in the Senate, but also in the House, and also on cyber. And so I'd love to follow up with you afterwards on just the threats that we see in that space, or if you want to, I've got 2 minutes now, if you want to talk a little bit about cyber threats as well.
Thank you, Ranking Member, because cyber domain is an operational domain for the Coast Guard, and it's of critical importance, not only in the day-to-day work, but in protecting the supply chains that the United States and our economy and our national security depend on in cyberspace. And so the Coast Guard has a cyber command that we use to operate to protect not only our own networks, but maritime critical infrastructure, our ports and waterways, and the facilities in cyberspace. And we've also benefited as a regulatory agency from increased authority, that we've put out a new regulation that governs U.S. port facilities and vessels and offshore facilities, ensuring that they meet required cybersecurity standards.
Thank you also for mentioning the port. We have the Port of Wilmington in Delaware. I think, again, these kinds of hearings are vital in terms of our role of oversight, and as well as just making sure that the resources are going where they need to go. Again, congratulations on being able to quickly recruit so many individuals. I think your testimony said it was the largest since 1991. And I think considering what you're facing, we're going to need all of those resources.
Thank you, Ranking Member.
Thank you, and I will yield back.
Thank you. Next, we have our chairman of the full committee, and I'm honored that Senator Cruz is here. He and I really tag team the effort in the budget reconciliation bill on making this historic, largest investment in Coast Guard history. So I want to thank the chairman for his great leadership on this. This is something that he and I, as the full chairman and as the chairman of this subcommittee, have a lot of pride in, because I think it was one of the more underreported elements of the budget reconciliation bill, but so important to our country, and historic investments in the Coast Guard. So with that, Mr. Chairman, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I fully agree with those sentiments. Admiral, welcome. Good to see you. Patrol Forces Southwest Asia's 6 fast response cutters in Bahrain are doing difficult work in the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea, escorting commercial traffic, countering piracy, and interdicting smuggling networks that use small vessels and dhows to move drugs, weapons, and other contraband. As you know, seizures of these vessels at sea can be extremely dangerous. In 2024, 2 Navy SEALs tragically drowned during a nighttime seizure in this area when trying to board a dhow moving Iranian weapons to Yemen. To my colleagues who think our Coast Guard and Navy should be boarding every Venezuelan drug runner, that's a risk you take, as our friend Senator Sheehy has pointed out. Congress just directed you to develop a policy to disincentivize maritime drug trafficking, including seizing or otherwise disposing of trafficking vessels. Right now, these sea pirates are just turned on their way with no consequence. What specific changes do you intend to make in the next year to turn these interdictions into real deterrents, resulting in fewer repeat offenders and fewer dhows going back to sea to move drugs and guns?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your question and your attention on this issue. We're very proud of our crews in Patrol Forces Southwest Asia that do this dangerous but very important work under the command of U.S. Central Command. And so I've communicated when I commanded Atlantic Area with the Central Command commander and the commander of Fifth Fleet out there, and I've asked Admiral Moore to do the same. I'm going to re-engage in the Department of War, the Central Command commander, Admiral Cooper, and talk to him about the way forward on this so that we can make sure we're being more effective as we do these important boarding operations.
I want to return to the topic that the chairman mentioned just a minute ago, which is after years of neglect, the Coast Guard is finally receiving the resources it needs to stop illegal immigration, to intercept drug traffickers, and to keep Americans safe at sea. In the Working Families Tax Cut Act that we passed last summer, it included the largest recapitalization of the Coast Guard in American history, over $24 billion. We also cut through layers of red tape and gave the Coast Guard flexibility to buy new ships and aircraft quickly. Let's talk about outcomes. What are 3 concrete capabilities you will deliver this year with this funding?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we are moving at speed and obligating the funds, and then delivering the outcomes is of paramount importance. And so the first outcome we're going to deliver is, and we've already obligated this funding, and that's the autonomous systems. So we've already invested in, obligated, and we're delivering the autonomous systems that we're using for air, short and medium range. We're also using for surface, and we've got a contract, for example, with Saildrone, and we're using that for border control. And then we're using it for underwater remotely operated vehicle operations as well. We're using those right now off the Polar Star in Antarctica. So that's one example of a suite of capabilities that we're bringing to bear in terms of delivering outcomes. The other outcomes is we just awarded in early January, I think around the 6th of January, a contract for the rebuild of Station South Padre Island, which is along the border there in southern Texas with Mexico, and it guards the Gulf of America, and it is the eastern end of Operation Riverwall in the Rio Grande River. And that $200 million award and investment will deliver a much more capable and enduring station there at South Padre Island that incorporates the Customs and Border Protection capability and other teammates. So, for example, from the state of Texas, has a secure communications facility and gives us the preeminent facility we need to be able to control, secure, and defend the southern border.
Very good, and I will say the investment in South Padre Island, I'm certainly grateful for, as are Texans across the board. Let's focus where you ended that. In October 2025, the Coast Guard surged additional response boats and tactical teams to the Rio Grande under Operation Riverwall to help establish operational control along roughly 260 miles of border river in South Texas. What are your clear, measurable outcomes for this operation as you surge forces to the river, and how will you prevent this mission from draining cutters, aircraft, and boarding teams from offshore counter-drug and other critical tasks vital to Texas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, as the Senior Operational Commander for the Coast Guard, as Commandant, I directed that operation begin, Riverwall, in October. And we had a presence there before, a long-standing presence, but it was fairly small, boat teams and boat crews working with Border Patrol. But we needed to infuse a much greater capability. And now we're looking at what is that enduring long-range force posture to do Operation Riverwall in a way that balances our commitment of forces there with operational demands in other areas. It's principally a boat force and tactical law enforcement supported by UAS and other surveillance capability. But we've learned a lot of lessons since October as we've done that. Our primary metrics are the number of interdictions of border crossings working with Border Patrol, and then also deterred attempted crossings across the Rio Grande.
Very good. I'll say finally, I appreciated your remarks earlier today about making sure that Coast Guard leadership is in place, and this committee will be meeting this coming Tuesday to advance those Coast Guard promotions, including the Vice Commandant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Lundy, welcome. I don't know if you know this, but I am a proud Coastie family member. My brother served under Rush, where he was also part of some of the boarding patrols because he spoke Indonesian. I've been troubled, Admiral, that under the Trump administration, the DoD continues to aggressively encroach on one of the Coast Guard's core missions, maritime law enforcement. And as often happens when experienced experts are replaced with interlopers, Secretary Hegseth has arrogantly tossed aside proven tactics that the Coast Guard has employed for years to thwart drug runners, bring them to justice, and facilitate vital intelligence collection. Instead, he has been playing judge, jury, and executioner, ordering military strikes to summarily kill suspected drug runners without regard for the laws of armed conflict or any evidence that these small vessels pose immediate imminent threat to the United States. Admiral Lundy, can you explain why the Coast Guard's trained boarding teams shoot at the engines instead of the operator when pursuing a suspected drug smuggling vessel?
Senator, when we conduct our maritime law enforcement operations at sea under our DHS and Coast Guard authority, we are interdicting those vessels as a law enforcement operation to seek to not only stop the drugs, but potentially prosecute those that are aboard. And so part of stopping those vessels that are smuggling drugs is our very specialized capability to disable them from a helicopter, our helicopter interdiction squadron that works with a cutter and small boat and our highly specialized teams to do those operations under our law enforcement authority.
Would you agree that the intelligence gathering component of it is also an important part of what you do when you stop these vessels?
When we conduct our law enforcement operations, it is, Senator.
Thank you. I agree that the use of lethal force against individuals and vessels suspected to be trafficking drugs, an action that by itself does not constitute armed conflict or terrorist activity, is illegal under the United States and international law. The Trump administration has heavily implied that fentanyl overdose deaths justify the unauthorized use of military force against small vessels departing Venezuela. Admiral Lundy, the U.S. Coast Guard has significant experience combating drug trafficking organizations. Does the U.S. Coast Guard have any reason to suspect that Venezuela is a major manufacturing hub for fentanyl?
Senator, our principal interdictions that involve Venezuela or Venezuelan gangs, and we've seen that principally in the Caribbean, that's principally we see the movement of cocaine at sea, but our criminal investigations that have been conducted in accordance with, along with Department of Justice, show strong ties between some of these groups that move the cocaine and other groups that are producing fentanyl. So we see the interdiction of cocaine, that's a cash crop for many of these cartels that funds their ability to produce and move fentanyl.
But you're not seizing massive amounts of fentanyl when you're doing these interdictions with vehicles that are leaving Venezuela.
Well, in my experience, Senator, the fentanyl we see, given its size and how it's moved, is traditionally moved by other means, not in bulk amounts like cocaine at sea.
Yeah, I think that's a clear point that most of the cocaine that passes through Venezuela to the United States arrives by air, and that sea routes departing Venezuela are mostly headed to Europe. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, Senator, your question was about cocaine to Europe?
Well, yes. So my understanding is that cocaine is a major illegal narcotic we agree that cocaine is the major narcotic that is transiting through Venezuela, and that most of it that's coming through Venezuela arrives in Venezuela by air. Is that correct?
I'd have to go back and look at how it gets into Venezuela, Senator, but when we see it move out of Venezuela through the Caribbean toward Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and other parts of the U.S., we see that move by sea, cocaine move by sea.
Okay. And just to be precise, last year, roughly how many pounds of fentanyl did the U.S. Coast Guard interdict that was arriving from Venezuela to the United States by sea?
I'm not aware of interdictions of any fentanyl by sea. The cocaine is the principal commodity or drug that's moved by sea.
Thank you. Aware of any in the last 5 years?
I'm not aware of any from Venezuela that we have seized as the Coast Guard in the last 5 years, Senator.
Thank you. Are a majority of individuals that the Coast Guard apprehends when it interdicts a vessel running drugs into the United States senior cartel leaders or important DTO members? Or often, do you find cartels hire individuals who know how to operate a vessel and are desperate for a job to operate those vessels?
Well, Senator, in our experience, the people that operate the drug smuggling vessels that we interdict in our maritime law enforcement role are connected with the cartels. They're part of the broader network.
But they're not the leaders of the cartel.
Not in my experience, they're not the leaders of the cartels.
Thank you. That's what I thought. The intelligence community and drug enforcement agencies in this country have known that the PRC is the true source of fentanyl precursor chemicals, which are bought by customers in Mexico and then smuggled into the United States. Bottom line, beyond alarm over the legality of these boat strikes, I fear that our country has grown distracted from the true threat vectors, whether it's fentanyl arriving from Mexico or countering the PRC in the Indo-Pacific region, particularly Southeast Asia. The Indo-Pacific theater poses a unique challenge in effectively countering the PRC and building robust and stable relationships with partners and allies requires a stable presence and predictable investments, especially in the Indo-Pacific. The last thing the Coast Guard should be forced to do is reroute resources and assets away from the Indo-Pacific to support President Trump's reckless foreign campaign to run Venezuela and enrich big oil corporations. Admiral, how has a pivot to Southcom operations impacted the Coast Guard's ability to reassure partner nations that the Coast Guard is committed to countering the PRC's role in maritime disputes, especially in the South China Sea?
Senator, we continue to maintain a trajectory of growth of Coast Guard posture in the Indo-Pacific with the addition of more cutters and more personnel, including in the pending 26 budget that will place additional personnel and capability in the Indo-Pacific. So the Coast Guard is not diminishing our footprint and presence in the Indo-Pacific, because for us, that's part of the U.S. homeland too, with Hawaii and the 3 territories there.
Absolutely. Well, I hope that continues to be true, but it is imperative that if the Coast Guard is forced to maneuver assets in a manner that jeopardizes its ability to fulfill statutory obligations, that you as Commandant report that deficiency to Congress immediately. So will you report back to Congress should your ability to maintain the commitments in the Indo-Pacific start to degrade?
Yes, Senator, we will.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. We're going to go into a couple more questions. I think Senator Cantwell's on her way, and she wants to also have the opportunity to engage. So I'm going to broaden the aperture here a little bit, Admiral, beyond Alaska. I want to get a sense of how Force Design 2028 is progressing. I want to compliment you and Secretary Noem and the Coast Guard leadership for laying out a vision. It's a really good document. I've read it. It's got a lot of big, ambitious goals. I think you're on the right path, but can you give just a quick update in how you are seeing the work of Force Design 2028, and what's the next phase of Force Design 2028 that you're focused on?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have been moving at speed to implement the Secretary's direction to transform the Coast Guard through Force Design 2028. In fact, the Secretary just released on the 15th of January the interim update, progress update, which is now posted on our website and is publicly available, and gives an outstanding summary and some detail on where we're going.
And I'm assuming the budget reconciliation, $25 billion investment will help supercharge and have you guys be able to achieve the goals, the ambitious goals that you put out in 2028 Force Design.
Budget reconciliation does exactly that, and supercharge is exactly the right word, Mr. Chairman. It is what is fueling the success of Force Design 2028. And so we've been able to do the 4 primary campaigns, enabling campaigns, which is streamlining our decision-making, streamlining our organization to remove consensus-based decision-making from the headquarters to move faster, delegate authority lower in the organization, closer to the front lines, and move people closer to the front lines to be able to streamline and create an acquisition and contracting superhighway, and then bring technology to bear to make the Coast Guard a leader, not a follower, in the federal government on adopting and applying technology.
Good.
That supports our 3 enabling or outcome tables: control, secure, and defend the border, facilitate commerce, and respond to crisis. Those outcome tables, our mission delivery, is part of force design. That's also what makes this unique. We have found that for the investment the American people make in the Coast Guard, we provide a 6 times return. So for about a $12 billion 2025 investment in the Coast Guard, it's an over $70 billion return on investment in lives saved, property protected, border protected. And so that's all part of the force design effort. But what we require to be successful is that continued top-line growth in our annual appropriations. Mr. Chairman, we're a $20 billion organization that is still only funded at about the $14 billion level. And so that will be an important part of our success in Force Design 2028.
And how about on the recruiting side? My ranking member here mentioned that, but there's a big goal of growing the force, and how do you see that going?
Mr. Chairman, it's going very well, and we're going to need to build on that success to keep moving forward and grow the workforce to meet the intent of growing it by 15,000 by the end of 2028, which was the Secretary's goal and direction in Force Design 2028. But we've also hit it from the retention side. We've seen improved retention in our military workforce. We need to do more work to improve our civilian retention because they're a critical part of our workforce as well. But that's all part of building a strong workforce and getting and keeping the best talent, because our people are our greatest treasure.
Great. Let me switch gears to another topic you and I have talked about. Senator Cantwell's here now. I know she cares about this topic as well. And that's the enforcement as it relates to IUU fishing. That's illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. I was proud to work with all my colleagues, but Senator Whitehouse in particular. We had my Fish Act legislation, which passed this committee, then passed the whole Senate. We attached it to the NDAA at the end of the year. Unfortunately, it got stripped out in the conference, which was a bit of a disappointment. But how is the Coast Guard using its assets, authorities, technology to combat IUU fishing? There was a big, I think, New York Times article just a couple weeks ago about these Chinese gray fleets in the hundreds and hundreds that fish in the high seas. They ravage the ocean. Countries in Africa and Latin America can't stop them. They are really aggressive. They're everything from a national security threat to a humanitarian crisis because they use slave labor. I mean, it's the worst of the worst, let alone destroying sustainable oceans and fisheries. My Fish Act is an aggressive response that would include the Coast Guard and even the U.S. Navy to go after these big gray fleets that are conducting IUU fishing. But you're already doing a lot of that. This bill would give you more authorities. But can you talk about some of the good work the Coast Guard's doing that and what a threat this is? Not just to sustainable fisheries and human rights, but it's a national security threat. The AFRICOM commander, 2 years in a row when I was at the Munich Security Conference, talked about IUU fishing as one of the top threats to AFRICOM and countries in Africa because of the Chinese just taking over the, fishing capabilities of small African countries and kind of treating them in a way that China does with most small countries like bullies. So how are you doing on that? What more authority do you need from us to combat IUU fishing, especially against the Chinese and Russians?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman, because countering IUU fishing is a top priority mission for the Coast Guard. It is about national security.
Yeah.
First, it's about controlling and securing our border and maritime approaches through our exclusive economic zone to protect our sovereign fisheries in those areas. But even beyond that, in the international space, reinforcing the international frameworks that prevent IUU fishing, because those impact our ability and our partner nations' ability to protect their own fish stocks and livelihood and this key protein source. So it is about national security. It's important for us in terms of authority and capability in 2 ways going forward. We need more ability to have maritime domain awareness, actually maritime domain dominance, so we can see what these IUU fishing fleets, these distant water fleets are up to, what they're doing. We can share that information with partners so we can be better at enforcement. And then we also need the at-sea cutter and air capability and other technology to be able to be effective in patrolling, deterring, and then enforcing not only U.S. law, but the international frameworks that prevent IUU fishing.
Good, that's great. Thank you for that. We'll continue to work on that, and hopefully I can get my bill passed and signed into law, which again had widespread bipartisan support on this committee, in the Senate, and now we just got to get it over the goal line, and it'll give you more authorities on a really important issue. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you and definitely want to work with you and also agree with what Admiral Lundy just said, that we need to have this domain expertise. What I really worry about the Arctic writ large is that without the capacity and without the resources that people think that we're missing, and as fish move further north, people think that those are their fish. And I definitely think that we have to have the capacity to address the issue, and certainly want to work with Senator Sullivan on this important issue as we share a fishing fleet that is challenged every day over this problem. So, Admiral, again, good to see you. Wanted to ask you about Slip 36 at Seattle. You guys have updated the aging facility plan and the workforce there. The reconciliation bill, I think, had some resources. Is Seattle part of your prioritization plan for, the infrastructure plan for the future?
It is, Ranking Member Cantwell. The critical part of the work there is to rebuild and build out the capability for our polar security cutters that will be home ported there, as well as Healy, which continues to be home ported there.
And so that's like part of an ongoing commitment, that the resources are there, right, committed?
Yes, Ranking Member, we had resources through annual appropriations before for some of that work, and reconciliation adds additional resources to advance and complete that work.
Okay, yeah, I think 323 million, is that right?
I believe that's correct, Ranking Member.
And then what about, when would we expect to see the polar security cutter construction? When would we expect to see ships arriving in Puget Sound?
The first polar security cutter, number 1, being built in Mississippi, is currently on track for completion and delivery to the Coast Guard in 2030. And so I can get it back to you with a specific projected date on when it will arrive at its home port, but it'll be delivered to the Coast Guard right now on track in 2030.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. And then we've talked about Cape Disappointment and the repair to damages for home port and new surf boats being built. I think it's in our state. What we want you to come and visit, and sorry, I'm missing actually missing a page here somehow. Cape D obviously is a very important part of our plan. And so we're trying to help dedicate, the maritime sector with the incredible exports that come out of the Columbia River. You agreed to work with us on a long-term plan to help fix the problems there at Cape D, so particularly accommodating new surf boats. So what, will you come visit, and will you help us continue to get this plan for Cape D?
We will, Ranking Member Cantwell, not only the improvements at Cape Disappointment, but also the long-term dredging challenge there at Cape Disappointment. And actually, if the government is funded, my current plan is to travel out to the Pacific Northwest in mid-February, including a visit to Station Cape Disappointment and the Motor Lifeboat School.
Good, good. Happy to join you at that. Might be better to come later in the year, but that's okay. We will take the early visit. And
I'll look forward to returning when you can join, Ranking
yeah,
Member.
thank you. Thank you so much. This issue of, our fishermen and the Coast Guard and the C-130s, earlier this month when a vessel ran aground, it was a C-130 that was first on the scene. We understand the C-130s, including at times one from Kodiak that our fishermen rely on, have been routinely transporting migrants to detention centers. Is that correct? Have the Coast Guard aircraft or personnel been used for transporting detained individuals on behalf of CPB or ICE?
Yes, Ranking Member, the Coast Guard has a unique capability within the Department of Heavy Lift that enables us to move people and equipment. Mostly that's our C-27 medium-range aircraft, although we have used C-130s in some cases to do that support to ICE or CBP at their request.
So how is that helping us meet our other mission of dealing with our fishermen that desperately need it in these treacherous waters?
Ranking Member Cantwell, I've given direction to our operational commanders that those type of support operations to other agencies are not to interfere with our primary national security or search and rescue missions. And we do that kind of balancing against mission priorities frequently. That's part of the nature of what we do and operational commanders do. And so that has not impeded our ability to conduct our other primary statutory missions.
Well, I see my time has expired, but I'm going to ask some follow-up questions to that and also on the Jones Act. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell, and Admiral, you've done a great job here, very full hour-and-a-half hearing, a lot of good questions. I'm going to end with one final question, and I'm sure Senator Cantwell will be interested in it as well. You know, Alaska's waters are some of the harshest in the world, yet only 19% of our coastline is currently covered by the Coast Guard's Rescue 21 system. The Marine Exchange of Alaska has proven critical in closing these coverage gaps, extending VHF, DSC, and AIS capabilities to areas Rescue 21 cannot reach, and has already saved lives during incidences of vessels that are in distress and the Wrangell landslide that we had. So the question is, the budget reconciliation bill with the historic investment in the Coast Guard has $170 million dedicated to maritime domain awareness. How is the Coast Guard planning to utilize that and continue to leverage partnerships like the Marine Exchange that I mentioned to rapidly expand coverage for communications and the Coast Guard's rescue system to ensure real-time safety communications across Alaska and high-risk maritime environments?
Mr. Chairman, so the Coastal Sentinel, which is a framework that is part of Force Design 2028, the concept there is to use sensors, not only Coast Guard and other federal government sensors, but those from partners, including the private sector, to bring that together to have a full picture and have not just maritime domain awareness, but give us maritime domain dominance for all of our border, including in Alaska. And so partnerships with groups or entities, organizations like the Alaska Marine Exchange are vital to our ability to gather and use their sensor data and then be able to share appropriately data back with them and then have a common data architecture. That partnership or those partnerships are vital to our ability to be successful with achieving maritime domain dominance through Coastal Sentinel.
Great. Well, listen, I want to thank you. I want to thank your team. I want to thank all the members of the Coast Guard and their families. Please send them our regards as the chairman and ranking member of this subcommittee on the great job that they're doing for our country. And hopefully we're going to get through this budget funding event in the next 24 hours and fund the Coast Guard. I can't think anything more damaging to have a shutdown that would hurt our Coast Guard members and their families. I also want to have the ranking member Cantwell's requests for her statement to be included for the record to happen without objection. And Admiral, thank you for your important testimony today. You did an outstanding job. I'm amazed that you answer all these questions with such detail without any notes. That's like great work, great staff work, by the way, behind you. I know
Sure, I have a great staff.
Senators will have until the close of business on Thursday, February 5th, to submit questions for the record for this hearing. And we respectfully ask you, Admiral, to try to respond to those QFRs by Thursday, February 19th. And with that, this concludes today's hearing. Thank you again. The committee stands adjourned. Okay.